It's time for another edition of Saturday with Seniors here on KC 101. And my guest today, AJ Correa, joining us here in our studios. And good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by. Now, you weren't originally from Tioga County, but boy, you have a really interesting story that we're going to get into here in a little bit. And it's actually amazing that you're here when people hear the story of a couple of things you went through in your life that are amazing that you're here. But let's go back to, what year were you born, can I ask?
1959.
1959. So you're a little younger than most of our guests here on the show, but you were born in Ohio. Now, from what I understand, you moved like 50-something times?
52 times before I left on my own, and then I've moved,
you moved
about a dozen times since then, yes. Living here in Tioga is the longest I've ever been in one place, and that's 14 years in October.
I've lived in 5 different states, and I've spent more than half my life in Tioga County. I'm here by choice, and it sounds like you are as well.
Yes.
So why did your family move around 52 times by the age of 23? Where you it seems like every month you had a new place.
In kindergarten, I was in 5 different kindergartens and 5 different first grades. That affected my ability to read. I didn't really learn how to read until I was in 7th grade, and they hired a tutor for me. But I had straight A's.
Yeah.
But my parents, they had their good days and bad days, and they would separate, and he'd take off to New York, and she'd go running after him, and then they'd move back to Ohio and do it again. So most of it was between New York and Ohio and New Jersey.
Wow. So after moving around this, you moved out at 23. Is that when, did you go to the military at that point?
Yes. Well, I went to the military at 21. I was in for active duty for a year, and then the Red Cross called us home because my father was very ill. Turned out he had metastatic cancer of the throat, and my mother told me she wanted me to come home and take care of him. I had a little bit of a medical background through Boy Scouts. We would work at the hospital once a week after school in all of the different departments, and I had wanted to be a doctor, but I went back to the Army and asked them, can I get leave to go home and take care of my father? And they said, well, how long is he going to live? I said 6 months. They said no. I took a compassionate discharge, which is an honorable discharge. And then I went into the reserves. But I never served a day as the reserves because they kept deferring me because he actually lived 2.5 years after that. He was from Puerto Rico. He always said he wanted to go back. My mother's job was Letterly Laboratories. I think American Cyanamid owned them, and they had a plant in Puerto Rico. So they gave her a compassionate transfer. They moved lock, stock, and barrel down to Puerto Rico. Here I was in a country that I didn't know the language, with an 18-month-old toddler, a dying father, and having to go back and forth to doctors, hospitals, and my mother worked continuously. We got there in June 1982, and he died June 83. After he died, we picked up and went back to New York, but the company wouldn't transfer her. They guaranteed her a job, but they wouldn't move us back again. So we sold absolutely everything. Came back with clothes on our back and a suitcase apiece. Moved in with my aunt and started over. When I first came home to take care of my enrolled in college, and between taking care of my daughter, taking care of him, I did full-time college. After he died, I threw myself into college like crazy. I went to Mercy College, and they have 8-week courses. I took 21 to 24 credits a semester. I did my 4-year degree in 3 years and graduated magna cum laude.
Wow. And you couldn't read until you were
in 7th grade.
In 7th grade.
And to be a computer programmer, you don't have to do all that much reading. You just look for patterns. And I was excellent at finding patterns in everything. So
you became a computer programmer then at that point?
Yes.
You did that for quite a while?
23 years.
Wow. What years are we talking about here now? Are we talking about 70s, 80s?
1983 and forward. I graduated in 85. I worked for Citibank. I went to a company called American Print. They printed food stamps and money for foreign countries. Very interesting job. And to go to the warehouses, they had security guards with machine guns because they printed billions of dollars.
They had a machine to make money.
Yeah. Then I went back to Citibank and then to UPS. I stayed at UPS 9 years. And I went from a programmer to a senior technical specialist. Then I left there and went to the bank founded by Hamilton. I can't think of the name of it. But my first day of work, on my way to drop my daughter off at daycare, I got hit head on.
A car, not a car coming
in. A truck hit me head on. He was in my turn lane. He had closed down the bars at 4, and at 6:45 he was still drunk. I put my head through the windshield and spent 18 months in rehab after that from a brain injury. And they told me I'd never work again. After 18 months, I was like, that's it, I'm going back to work. So I got hold of my brother, and he was a headhunter for computer programmers. He got me a temporary consulting job down in Georgia. I was there for 3 months. I was supposed to move to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, but the boss came in one day and fired everyone except people with green cards. They let us all go. Moved back to New York. He got me an interview with Morgan Stanley. I loved the place. Really great company to work for, except for one boss. He refused to follow any ADA rules or anything. If I was running a little bit late for work, I'd come in and he'd be screaming at me. So I went to the feds and reported him for violating ADA, and he got fired. I worked in compliance, which was really fun. You write programs to catch traders doing illegal stuff. You learn a lot about the ins and outs of the market, the FCC, all of that. I worked under a boss, Jeff Pearlman, at one point. He was a great guy. I shouldn't say was, because I just found out another Morgan Stanley person died this week. And he was quite the hero. Stanton Hollington. The day the plane hit, he saw a pregnant secretary was still at her desk after they called the evacuation, and she said she couldn't make it down the stairs alone. So he grabbed her, shuffled her to the stairwell, got down from the 69th floor to about the 45th when the whole building shook and flames were shooting through the stairwell. They stopped just before him and the secretary. They made it down the stairs, through the lobby, over by this broker that was there when the tower came down. And it threw them through the doors out onto the street.
Wow. Like 2 seconds earlier down, they would have been...
They would have been crunched. And they made it up the hill to Bank of New York, and the next tower came down and threw them to the ground again. And then they got to the Staten Island ferry and got out of there.
Going back to September 11th, 2001, when this all happened, before that, you were not at work. You were on vacation a little bit before that.
Right. The week before 9/11, I went camping with a friend and his kid, and I had my daughter with me, and we went on a little hike. And my whole life, I would drink creek water, hold it up to see if anything suspicious was floating in it, and drink it. I didn't see anything, I drank it. I came back to work on Monday, and I had a pile as high as my desk of open problem logs.
So this is September 10th, 2011, day before September 11th. You had been on vacation a week. You come back to work the day before September 11th. Of course, you had no idea the next day was going to be an eventful day. Pile of work on your desk. You took it home with you?
Yeah, I worked all day to work on some, so then before I went home, I scooped up a bunch, took it with me, picked up my daughter, dropped her off with my ex, who worked just a couple blocks from where I lived. And I lived 3.5 blocks from the World Trade Center.
So you got at the shadow of the building on your house. You're that close.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I went in, ordered food to be delivered, sat down, logged into Morgan Stanley, and I worked for a while, and about 10 o'clock at night, I came to on the floor. And then I had another excruciating pain. I called my doorman. He got me a limo up to Beth Israel. They did some tests that I had pancreatitis. They admitted me, luckily. The next morning, I was calling out sick, and I got hold of Greer Epstein, the vice president there, and told her I wasn't going to be in. She goes, so what's new? And I said, nothing much, just pancreatitis. And the nurse gave me a shot of morphine while I was on the phone into my IV. and turned on my TV. And as soon as she turned it on, they broke in that a plane had hit Tower 1, the North Tower. I told her that a plane hit the tower. She hung up with me and immediately called an emergency evacuation of all of Morgan Stanley in the tower.
So because you were watching TV, you were able to help this evacuation of Morgan Stanley and the whole tower just to maybe start, even just a few seconds, could have been several lives that were saved.
Well, she saved 2,900 people by calling the evacuation. And still, I think 15 or 16 Morgan Stanley employees died. If I had been at work and someone had called the evacuation, I still would have been dead. That plane came straight through the floor I worked on and up. The policy at Morgan Stanley, if you were disabled, and I was, I used the cane to get around. Well, the policy is you go to your cubicle and wait for security to come get you and help you out. On the 69th floor, there was also a guy with cerebral palsy. He would have been in his cubicle. Thank God we were both out that morning. Unfortunately, security didn't know that, and the security guard was going up the stairs to where we would have been when the plane hit, and he died.
He was coming to look for the two of you?
Yeah.
Oh.
And he was a highly decorated Vietnam War veteran, had a wife and kids. It was very sad when everyone found out he had died.
Yeah.
I had no idea Greer got everyone out. I saw where the plane went through, and I just assumed they were all gone.
I mean, your hospital bed at this point still...
I could see it from my hospital bed, the smoke coming up from the towers.
So what was going through your head when you thought all your coworkers, everyone that you worked with and knew was dead? I mean...
Well, I was more
I can't
worried...
imagine a worse feeling.
It was very upsetting, and it hit me that was the first day of school for my daughter. She went to school immediately behind the World Trade Center, a block from their complex. I tried to get hold of my ex. You could use cell phones at that point. Found out that she had been dropped off. My ex ran back to get her, took her out, and instead of leaving the area, which I would have assumed anyone would have done, hauled her back to their job and kept her there. She was being carried when she saw the building I work in come down.
This is your daughter saw the building?
Yeah, she thought I was at work. So she was very upset, and she knew a lot of people from Morgan Stanley. It was 5 days that I was in hospital before the social worker told me I hadn't got hold of my family. She said, "Can you change your answering machine message remotely?" And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. So I left my message that I was still alive in Beth Israel, and word finally got back to my family. My oldest daughter was on an internship at Disney World, and her manager in the Red Cross came in to tell her I had died. Because I signed in from home, Morgan Stanley's mainframe said I was at work when the plane hit. I never signed out. I'm sure they've changed that they boot you out now after a while, but they didn't. And when my mother or my sister, I don't know which one, tried to find out, Morgan Stanley set up their own hotline outside of the Red Cross. They got hold of it, and they were told I was at work, lost, and presumed dead. I guess because of the bombing in 91 or 93, where the truck bomb went off in the basement, they had a policy that in the event of an evacuation, everybody meets at one site. And they went through and said who all made it back. If you weren't there, they presumed you were dead. I guess it was about a week before I got hold of my boss and told her I was alive. The hospital wouldn't release me because I couldn't go back to my apartment. The building was closed because of smoke and damage. Finally, I made arrangements with my uncle to go stay up in Haverstraw, New York. The hospital sent me by ambulance to the Port Authority, where my ex met me with my daughter, and she and I went up to Haverstraw and stayed there for a while. I only had the clothes on my back. I rented a car, went to Goodwill, and bought a bunch of clothes and went down to Manhattan. My building was open at that point. My apartment was a wreck. There was a half-inch of World Trade Center dust over everything.
Windows were all blown out too, and everything's all got in, or
the
just
windows
got
survived
in through the outside.
Yeah, they survived. Unfortunately, because it had been warm the day before, and that Monday, I had my air conditioner on full throttle, so it just sucked in that dust and put it all over everything. I got hold of my girlfriend, had her come down. We got a bunch of cleaning supplies. I was cleaning some stuff off in the bathroom when she came in with a bloody nose. So I took her home. I got my daughter, went back to my ex's and stayed for a while. Her school had moved uptown in with another elementary school. I went down to ground zero on my own. I told them I wanted to volunteer. They gave me boots, gloves, heavy-duty construction clothes, a jacket, and they put me at the gate where all the guys from the pit were coming in and out, and they would jump up and down to get the dust off them, and it got all over me. So I would hose them off. I would go get coffee for them so that they wouldn't have to go through that. But
you volunteered to do all this?
Yeah. When I first went there, I took the subway over, and I was walking towards it, and the sound, it still makes me very emotional. You heard hundreds of police emergency beepers going off from the trapped and dead. The smell was burning flesh. I walked forward, and when I saw that mound, I couldn't believe it. I didn't go into work at Morgan Stanley. They let me volunteer. I stayed 4 months till they got the last body out, and it was someone I knew from my teens. She had been working there and had 2 children, one with Down syndrome.
She was the last body recovered from that cleanup, and it was somebody you knew, not, you said from teams or from your teens?
From my teens.
So not even work-related, just knew from in life in general?
Yeah.
Wow.
She actually worked with my mother at Letterly's. Whenever they found a body, you would line up at the ramp they had to pull the trucks and ambulances out, and people would salute the ambulance as it went by with the body. I stood there when she went by, and I just said to myself, enough is enough. I left. Everything was everywhere. They found people's belongings on buildings blocks away. I don't think I slept much during that time either. I had a hard time dealing with it.
I would be expected. I mean, I can't imagine the trauma. I mean, that'd be PTSD, like a very high level, experiencing everything. Just the trauma of thinking all your coworkers are dead.
Yeah.
Even for an hour is enough to give you trauma for a long time, let alone for days.
And I do have PTSD. Whenever I'm watching TV and they suddenly pop up a picture of the World Trade Center on fire or the plane hitting, I stop breathing. I fell off my bed one time because of it. I was sitting there and they came up and I just went flop right off the bed. I'm covered by the World Trade Center for health issues. They cover my medications for emphysema and any counseling I need. And they cover to test for cancer if you have any symptoms. And there's a 9/11 site on Facebook for volunteers, and it's sad how many people keep dying from cancer from the chemicals. And we didn't wear masks in the beginning. The city decided they didn't want us wearing them because it would panic the Wall Streeters walking by to get to their offices. They kept saying, oh, the air is safe. People that volunteered for as little as a few days have gotten skin cancer, lung cancer. It's terrible.
In your opinion, do you think they knew
I think they did.
That they're exposing you to that kind of hazard? Or they just, because I mean, this was an unprecedented event to compare it to.
Right, but I think they knew. They kept saying that there was nothing toxic on the site. That's bull, because we're removing asbestos all over the place. They would tape off an area and remove the walls and replace them. Even if they said no one compound was unsafe, all of the things that were burning were creating new chemicals that the EPA knew nothing about. There was a guy that was cleaning the outhouses. He did it for, I think, a week. He got a really aggressive form of skin cancer and died within a year. And they don't know what it was that caused it. There are a lot of situations like that where people that volunteered for a very short period ended up terminally ill. I just had the breathing problems. They did a CAT scan once and found a spot on my lung, but when they did the follow-up test, it hadn't grown, so they said not to worry about it. So I don't. It was weird. I watched the World Trade Center go up from Jersey City. We lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up. 5 kids in a 3-bedroom railroad flat, 1 bath. It was very unsafe in that neighborhood. I had a lot of good friends, but there were a lot of kids that just beat on us, and they also knew that we might have a little bit of change on us. So they wanted to take our money away.
They bullied you, basically.
Yeah. So instead of going out, we would sit on the fire escape. What a view. I could see the Verrazano Bridge up to the Chrysler Building, and that landscape was beautiful. But the World Trade Center was being built then. And we used to watch, it was like watching fireworks, to see the welders welding the girders together and all the lights they had on their site. It was really neat for kids. Then I saw it come down. So I saw the World Trade Center go the full life cycle. And now they have that one tower there. I still haven't gone back.
I was going to ask if you've been back to see the memorial that is there.
No.
Do you think you ever will? Was that something you'd be okay with ever, or is that...
I know
it would never be easy, I'm sure.
I don't think it would be easy, and I've had people from around here that have gone there and say it's oh so beautiful and everything, and I'm like...
I was there a couple times. I don't know if beautiful is the word to use. It needs to be there. It's a very quiet... I mean, I went to the Holocaust Museum, and I had almost the same kind of saddened feeling inside, thinking about all the lives, not just the lives lost, but the families left behind without that loved one. For every person lost, there's dozens mourning.
And I lost 13 friends the day the tower came down. My boss from UPS finally tracked me down. We left UPS and were working in the towers. He was late for work and didn't make it. He was at the train station to take the tubes into the city when they announced that no trains would be going, that the towers had fallen. And I wasn't there that morning. So she's like, yep, you two both lived up to your expectations and weren't there.
I shouldn't laugh, but it is kind of funny the way you phrase it there. Someone was looking out for you, that's all I'm going to say.
Because of the car accident, I missed a lot of work because of migraines, but I always worked twice as much from home, where it was quiet and no fluorescent lights over my head and everything. I could put out a lot of production and have a nice, quiet, peaceful time.
So after this, you somehow ended up in Tioga County. We don't have a ton of time to talk about how you ended up in Tioga County, because I really wanted to hear your whole story on this part. But so after this, how did you end up in Tioga County? After
the World Trade Center, I moved to New Jersey, Atlantic Highlands. You could still see the New York City skyline from there. I didn't want to. So we moved to Delaware. And I was in Delaware for 2 years, and I started making and selling candles. I made a lot of money doing that. I do it at flea markets and on eBay. And I had one customer from Pennsylvania that ordered 1,000 candles, came down, picked them up. She ordered another 1,000 and called and said she didn't have gas money. Could I bring them to her? So I packed up the candles in my truck, drove up to Pennsylvania, dropped them off. And when I decided to go to Pennsylvania, I knew I wanted to buy a house. And I couldn't afford one in Delaware. So I went online on Google, and I found the lowest taxes, the lowest prices. I searched every county in Pennsylvania. Tioga came up the winner. I got a hold of a real estate agent. We dropped off the candles and came up here. We stayed at the Penn Wells. We went to 5 different places, and I bought the first house I saw. Once we moved up here, I got into genealogy. Lo and behold, I found out that my grandfather had roots from Coudersport, and I actually have family buried out there. But he came from there and moved to southern Ohio.
Wow. So that's quite a story that you shared. And so you've been in Tioga County since
2008.
And what do you do out here in Tioga County? Are you retired at this point?
I am retired. I don't make candles anymore. It got too expensive to have the wax shipped up here.
Yep.
And too far to drive to go get it. So I met a woman online. We talked on the phone for 2 years. She was in a really bad situation. I heard her boss screaming at her one day. I said, I'm coming to get you out of there. I flew out there, picked her up for lunch. Once I got her out, I called her boss and told her she quit. We went in, packed up all of her stuff from her room, shipped it back here, flew back here, and have both been here ever since. That was March of 2015.
Wow. That's quite a story you got there.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I like the fact that it's now relatively calmer.
And where do you live in Tioga County? Which town?
Little Marsh.
Nice little quaint village?
Yes, very quiet. My neighbor plows my driveway in the winter. I mow his lower lawn in the summer.
And it all works.
It all works out.
Appreciate your stopping by and sharing your story with us here on KC 101.
Thank you
so much.
Nice to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that.
Nice to be here in a lot of ways.
Well,
nice
yes.
to be alive.
It's, I mean, being hit by a drunk driver head on and going through the windshield.
I was hit by 2 drunk drivers in my life. The first one, I was in the Army, and it was 4th of July weekend, and I was driving a Chevy Chevette. And I filled the tank, pulled out of the gas station, went to make the left turn on an arrow, and he came down on the shoulder, plowed into me. When I went to see the car after the accident, the passenger seat was on the driver's seat. I had gotten pinned between the steering wheel and Kathy, my passenger. Everyone made it out alive. There were 4 of us from the military in the car.
So again, you've survived 9 lives at least, or whatever you've got from everything you've been through.
I figure I've used up about 8 of them, so I got to be careful from now on.
Well, you do that, okay?
Yeah.
AJ Correa, thank you for joining us in our studios and sharing your story about your life. Thank you for being a part of our program.
Thank you.
All right, we're at KC 101. Thanks for joining us. And if you're interested, by the way, in sponsoring Saturday with Seniors, give us a call at 6